listening to Limed, Teaching with a Twist, a podcast that plays with pedagogy. Welcome to Season 4 of Limed, Teaching with a Twist. This season, we're twisting things up a bit and theming the show. All season, we'll be talking about mentoring and mentoring relationships in higher education, a critical piece of teaching excellence. In this kickoff episode, our guests, Titch Madzima, Maureen Vandermass-Peeler, and Sabrina Perkins, share personal stories of mentorship and explore why mentoring is essential in higher education. Together, they unpacked what mentorship really means, the challenges institutions face, and how approaches like mentoring constellations can shape a more inclusive and impactful future. Enjoy the episode, and if you do, please rate, review, and share our podcast with your network. I'm Matt Whitstein. Hi, Titch. Hi, Sabrina. Hi, Maureen. It is so good to have you here for Season 4 of Limed, Teaching with a Twist. I would love for you all to introduce yourselves. And as you do that, I want you to think about who some of your mentors were and what are the most important, valuable qualities you found in them that were supportive of you getting to where you're at.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks for having us on this podcast. So my name is Titch Madzima. I'm an associate professor in exercise science. I'm also the Japheth E. Rawls Professor in Undergraduate Research and Science and the chair of the Department of Exercise Science at Elon University. So when I think of my mentors, I'm really grateful to have had in graduate school an amazing advisor. We basically nicknamed her Mom, but just a true leader, someone who was incredibly caring, but was also had such high standards for ethics and just for the way she carried herself. One of the things I really appreciated about her is how she really was able to treat all her students. She had an individual approach to all of us and how she mentored all of us and our needs and was so adaptable to where we were, our skill sets, and helping to maximize our skill sets. And then as a faculty member, I was super grateful to have two amazing mentors that really helped me. One mentor shared a similar ethnic identity as I did, or racial identity as I did, and another mentor didn't. And I really value those two perspectives that I was able to get that mentorship from.
Thank you so much, Matt, for inviting us on. I'm Sabrina Perkins. I'm an associate professor. I'm about to start my 9th year at Elon. I'm a developmental psychologist, and I have disciplinary expertise in infancy. And I also do research on the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning focused on mentoring relationships in higher ed. So recently, actually, together with Titch, we served as co-leaders for a recent Center for Engaged Learning seminar on mentoring meaningful learning experiences. So my interest in mentoring is in part influenced by my own experience of being mentored as a student and grad student and early professional. And so I'm a queer first-gen college student from a low-income background. And when I think about my own mentors, I just feel super fortunate that the majority of the relationships that I cultivated throughout that whole time of my career have been characterized by people just using like feminist practices, encouraging authenticity, and helping me feel empowered in myself. And I've been able to hopefully use some of that in my work with the students that I mentor.
I'm Maureen Vandermass-Peeler. Sometimes the students at Elon University call me MVP, mainly because I have a really long last name. I'm a professor of psychology, and I direct the Center for Research on Global Engagement at Elon. And I almost hesitate to share this, but I just celebrated my 30th year at this institution. I really began to study mentoring when I directed our honors program over a decade ago. And then I co-led a seminar on excellence in mentoring undergraduate research through the Center for Engaged Learning with colleagues Paul Miller and Brad Johnson, who is an international expert. And I was very inspired by the seminar and our participants, and also my work of over 30 years of mentoring students. I love your question, Matt. And when I think about why is this so important, and how does my own mentoring relationship, especially when I was an undergraduate, influence my work is in an undergraduate focused institution. And it was my undergraduate research mentor, Dr. Debbie Best at Wake Forest. And she inspired me. She is one of the greatest connectors I've ever known. She will put students together at a conference and call us siblings or cousins, or she just created a family, a familial relationship, even though I didn't even know these students until I would get to the conference. She's was very supportive. Like Titch mentioned about his mentor, held very high standards. My first undergraduate research experience was actually in France. And I didn't always understand the children. They didn't really always understand me. And the integration of these high impact practices of undergraduate research and global learning, that sort of kicked off my interests in both undergraduate research and mentoring. And I study that now. So thanks. I think that's probably enough by way of introduction.
That is fantastic. And I think through some of my own mentors, I often think, and what I heard from you all a little bit is that they let you be yourself, but they really push you to be the best version of yourself. And it sounds like that's in different ways for each of you, which is fantastic. So to kick off the sort of questions I have for you, I think it's really important to get some context of why does mentoring matter? Why is it generally important? And then maybe more specifically in the context of higher education, especially in different higher education contexts, why does mentoring matter?
Yeah, I can kick it off, Matt, just with some thoughts, and I'm sure everyone's going to add in. I mean, because mentoring matters for so many reasons. And some of the first things that, comes to mind, and something that Maureen just mentioned about her mentor was being a connector. And, that's such a huge aspect, I think, of a mentor, someone who's modeling what, your professional life could look like, or, but someone who's there to give you perspective, not necessarily to have you walk the same path that they have, but then to give you guidance, give you perspective, particularly when it's when the mentee actually opens up that door for the mentor to give like that feedback and perspective. That's, I think, a really powerful tool. And I often think of a mentor different stages as someone who's going to pull you up to a different level. And that could be for a year, it could be for 10 years or 20 years sometimes with some of our mentoring relationships. But those are some of the things that come to mind.
Whenever I think about the importance of mentoring, I actually think about how it's important for both people. So kind of building off of what Titch was saying, when we look at how the research on mentoring started, there was a lot of inspiration, I think, from psychology. So some theorists that came to my mind were like Erik Erikson and Daniel Levinson, and both of them were really interested in looking at how in various life phases, people's kind of experience goes through like stable periods and periods of change. And they both saw mentoring as something that happens in meaningful ways, both for young people who are being mentored, but also for people who have more experience who are doing the mentoring. So I think building off of what Titch shared about the benefits for students, there's also benefits for faculty who serve as mentors. I think most of us would probably point to our mentoring that we offer as some of the most fulfilling parts of what we do on a daily basis. And I think this is related to the concept of generativity that Erik Erikson wrote about, which is how we sort of pass on and support future generations beyond us. So it's almost like a legacy in a way. Our colleague here at Elon, Dr. Eric Hall, published some work on award-winning mentors and found that oftentimes those mentors talk about how the process of mentoring students help them feel more engaged in their own work, and how their students brought new ideas and fresh perspectives that help to kind of inspire them and reinvigorate them into their professional kind of networks and fields.
That was really well said, Sabrina. Thanks for hearkening back to Eric's work with his colleagues that came out of the research seminar that I co-facilitated so many years ago. And it's great that we're still seeing that group be really productive. When I think about when everyone picked their head up and realized that mentoring mattered, it really was kicked off in higher education by the Gallup 2014 poll. The large study of alumni, and basically they discovered that students who are alums who reported that they had at least one meaningful relationship were more likely to be thriving in their work. And this caught everyone's attention. All of us on this call today are very active mentors, whether it be in undergraduate research or in identity work like Titch is talking about. So we have all known personally, but I think that was a real moment for higher education when policies and practices on college campuses started to really adhere with this idea that all students need mentoring relationships. So I think between our experiences that we have personally and our research that we've been doing, and then also this national research, which has been supported many times now in Center for Engaged Learning polls, that students who are reporting that they have one or more significant relationships, whether that be with faculty, staff, or peers, are showing some really positive outcomes. And so I think we have both research and our personal experiences to draw from here. And I love Sabrina's point about these relationships are mutually beneficial. They are reciprocal. We don't necessarily derive the same benefits, but we obviously, given the intensity of really sustained mentoring relationships that are relational, as you described, Sabrina. It's important work. It's very time-consuming work. And so I think we're all doing it because we know that it matters to us and to our students.
So we've talked a little bit about our own mentors, and you've also shared why you all believe mentoring is important. I think it's really important for the context of a season about mentoring in higher education to at least establish, what is our operational definition of mentoring in higher education? And I realize this isn't going to be a perfectly clean definition, but if you were to define mentoring in higher education contexts, what would that include? What might that not include? Where are spaces where people get confused about what is and what is not mentoring?
I mean, having been involved in institutional works on this very topic, I guess one salient thing to mention is that there is not a universal definition of mentoring. I think that's important, and scholars have recognized that might also be beneficial in some ways because of the importance of considering mentoring in context. So I think the one thing people can agree on is that mentoring needs to be developmental. It needs to be tailored to individual students' needs. It's sustained. I do not have the definition we created right in front of me, but we worked on creating a definition with iterative processes of getting buy-in from many, many constituents at our own institution. And we've since floated it out there. If you're interested, there's a web page, a web text on the Center for Engaged Learning website, which is called Mentoring Matters. And our definition is there, but some of the key elements are the ones I've just mentioned, and also the things that Sabrina and Titch have talked about, that we think about everyone's identities involved, that we think about reciprocity and mutually beneficial relationships. These are sustained relationships. Mentoring does not happen in one meeting over a cup of coffee. We love coffee. It's great, but it's not unto itself a mentoring relationship. And so these are some of the elements.
This is from Maureen Vandermass-Peeler and Peoples. Maureen's work with J.C. Moore and Tim Peoples. But mentoring relationships are fundamentally developmental and learner-centered, And within college and university environments, specifically, mentoring relationships are distinct from other meaningful relationships in that they promote academic, social, personal, identity, cultural, and career-focused learning and development in intentional, sustained, and integrative ways. They evolve over time, become more reciprocal and mutually beneficial, are individualized, attending to mentees' developing strengths and shifting needs, mentors' expertise, and all members' identities, and they function within a broader set of relationships known as a mentoring constellation. I thought that was such a great definition. I think it really covers so much.
I think there are a lot of areas that whenever I hear people talk about mentoring, that it feels like there might be just like different understandings of some of these dimensions. So one of them is the fact that this is a long lasting relationship. So I think sometimes we hear mentoring kind of getting thrown around on different university campuses. And Maureen can tell many audiences, mentoring is not just a cup of coffee. This is something that takes a very long time to develop. And it involves a deep knowing of the other person and also ourselves in relation with that person. So that would be one thing that I think is a common kind of misconception. Another one we already talked about, which is that mentoring relationships are mutually beneficial. That does not mean that we get the same things out of the relationship. It means that we both benefit in different ways. So obviously, the types of support that I'm giving my students in mentoring is not the same benefit that I'm getting from them, but they still teach me things that I can take with me and grow from. And then one other thing, and I'll stop, is mentors have to have more achievement and experience within the area that is involved in the mentoring context. So if I view us as equals and neither one of us has more experience in that area, that is not a mentoring relationship. That is a supportive relationship, and it's beneficial, but it's not mentoring. So those are just a few that come to my mind.
That's so great, Sabrina. I totally concur. Something that you said just kind of came to mind about that just getting coffee or, that it is not necessarily mentoring. And I think a mentoring relationship has to be formalized in some way. I mean, sometimes a mentee can say, hey, will you mentor me? Or, through undergraduate research. But I think there has to be some sort of formalization to the relationship. And that can happen organically too. And then the other thing you mentioned too about just the expertise aspects, that the mentor does need to have some fruit on the tree, I think is so true. But something that else came to mind and that leads into the mentoring constellations is that one mentor can serve all the purposes for a mentee. And so it's really important for students or people who are seeking mentorship to really know why they want that person to mentor them, and what for, and what that relationship entails. I think that can be really important. Like any relationship, no one person can serve all our needs too. So
I just love your answers so much, Sabrina and Titch. I'm just smiling, and it just makes me so happy. You've lifted up so many important points. I think we've mentioned the constellation model a few times, so it might be worth saying that this model is predicated on the idea that mentoring is complicated and that there are multiple areas of support that people need. So it could be academic support, social support, cultural or identity support. And the idea that one person, one primary mentor can serve all of these needs is, I think, arcane and really not what we see in practice. We did lots of interviews, over 100 interviews as part of the work for an institutional self-study recently. And we found out that that's exactly what's happening in practice. People have multiple mentors. It was almost an intervention to ask students about a constellation model, because as they began talking, within 20, 30 minutes, they were naming multiple people that they hadn't thought of right away. They're realizing that this area of support are important. And so I think in the literature, it's often this traditional relationship, hierarchical, one mentor, one student. And what we're all saying here is that actually a constellation model embraces the idea that students have diverse needs and that one person shouldn't even be expected to fill them all.
So I want to come back to the mentoring constellations as a participant in the most recent Center for Engaged Learning research seminar on mentoring meaningful learning experiences. My group, used that constellation model and constellation mapping. And one of the things that we found really valuable was to acknowledge that the supportive people also matter, not necessarily in the exact same way as the mentors. But that map, that constellation does include those more broad supportive people, which may not have that characteristic of that Sabrina talked about of having more achievement or experience, that they're really there simply for support in a lot of different ways, a lot of different areas. So I just found that interesting as you all were talking about that, one of the connections I made. I do want to ask, when we think about some of the strengths and challenges of mentoring in higher education historically, I often think about how mentoring relationships were probably some of the hidden curriculum for a very long time that we're just now trying to unhide. And so I'm curious what you all see as some of the historic challenges and the challenges that still need to be addressed through mentoring and mentoring programs.
I think one challenge that comes to mind, is lack of diversity of mentors or available mentors, in higher ed, and particularly in institutions like ours and like Elon, and where a lot of students from different backgrounds may not see mentors or people available to mentor them with similar identities that are obvious or sometimes hidden too. And so I think that historically could have been a barrier for students from certain groups or backgrounds seeking out mentorship. I think it could have been a big barrier and probably served other populations of students really well, because they have seen many faculty that share similar identities to them. So I think that's something work is trying to really seek to identify, to correct and help improve mentoring in that perspective.
Yeah, I think building off of Titch's point, the majority of U.S. institutions of higher ed were built for white, wealthy, Protestant, elite, land-owning men. And obviously that is not what our student body looks like now. And I think we're still catching up a lot in terms of making things accessible and improving the way that we're able to support and work with students that don't come from that traditional kind of background in the U.S. So I think building off of Titch's point, a lot of us in general, a lot of faculty were never really trained on how to be mentors. I think I even took one class on how to teach. There is not much out there in a lot of grad programs. And a lot of us, especially, have not gone through training on mentoring students that have been historically excluded from higher ed. And considering the fact that a lot of full-time faculty in the U.S. are white, many white faculty, including myself, were never trained on how to work with students that come from these historically excluded racial backgrounds. So there's a lot of complex things that we need to learn as mentors in order to support an increasingly diverse student body. But I think the good thing is that mentoring skills can be learned and can be developed. And there are some people maybe that should not be mentors, but a lot of us who are interested and willing to get better, we can develop those skills. So I think there are a lot of opportunities that are out there for faculty that may come from more sort of dominant backgrounds, but also faculty who themselves, as Titch was describing, come from historically excluded backgrounds to learn about their own, identities and things that they can offer to students using strengths-based perspectives that are informed in many different areas, like cultural areas or socio-political, or like diversity-informed approaches, disability-informed. Like there's so much that we can all learn in different areas of working with a range of students.
Again, my colleagues have made such great points. I support them all. I guess I would point out that as we've been talking about this constellation model, there is a gap between practice and research. We don't have a lot of evidence of how to help students build their constellations, how to help students find agency to identify these relationships. Titch, I think you mentioned it earlier, that sometimes it's hard to know if it's a mentoring relationship. With undergraduate research, we have a structure around it. But think about students who do come from these historically underrepresented and excluded groups. They may not see somebody, as you pointed out, Titch, who looks like them. They may not know how to approach the whole thorny topic of finding a mentor. Lots of students in the interviews that we did reported actually being afraid to have conversations with faculty. And we create cultural supports and institutional supports, and we believe that this is our work. And yet students are telling me, I'm still afraid to go talk to somebody. So we need to, I think, identify ways, multiple pathways is the conclusion we can keep drawing. There's not one right way to find a mentor. So knowing that sometimes it's in the cohort, sometimes it's in the residence hall or student employment, just creating multiple pathways for students, I think is one of our challenges and opportunities.
So this has been some wonderful conversation to kind of wrap up and lead where I hope our season's conversation goes. Where do you want mentoring, scholarship, and practice to go in the next 10 years?
It's a great question, Matt. I think that for me, and you've all heard me talk about it so much, but I think the constellation model offers so many opportunities to think about how mentoring relationships can work in any context. So I think we often think about undergraduate research, but it is much more than that. So students have peer relationships that are very important in terms of their support and belonging to a particular campus community, for example. So understanding this complexity is challenging. Mentoring relationships are so dynamic that if we only study them at one point in time, we are really missing, I think, the evolution of a mentoring relationship. There's so many fascinating things to study, I guess is what I want to say. So I am hopeful that the research on mentoring really explodes in positive ways and helps us understand what the gaps might be between our theories and our models and what's happening in practice. We haven't mentioned this specifically, but in addition to studying award-winning mentors, Eric Hall and colleagues have identified these salient practices of mentoring, and they're tied very much to undergraduate research, but it could be interesting to look at what are the salient mentoring practices in different contexts. So those are just a few ideas, mainly, continuing to close the gap between theory and practice.
Yeah, I think I'm not going to repeat what Maureen said, but I think, the mentoring constellations, I think is going to be something that mentoring should focus on, in the years to come.
I agree. And I'll just add that we still have so much work to do to understand mentoring relationships from students that have these underrepresented experiences, or historically excluded from academia. So there's so much that we need to do in terms of understanding strengths-based perspectives instead of this kind of traditional deficit lens where, people were viewing like students coming in already behind or already with these issues. And I think we have a lot to do in terms of viewing, like, what are people coming to university with, or even what do communities have outside of the university? What kind of strengths do they have outside of the university? I think there's also a lot of work that we still need to do in terms of understanding identity intersections and how that impacts people's experiences of privilege and oppression within the academy. And I think we need to do a lot more in terms of understanding not only how to support students from historically underrepresented groups, but also faculty with those experiences, and thinking about like retention of students and faculty and how to promote career advancement. So I think it is it is a lot of work, but it's also very exciting to be in this work at this time when it feels like we can make such a difference for so many people across the board.
Well, thank you all so much for this conversation and opening up our new season of Lyme Teaching with a Twist. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Matt.
Lymed, Teaching with a Twist is a podcast produced in collaboration with the Center for Engaged Learning at Elon University. For more information, including show notes and additional engaged learning resources, visit www.centerforengagedlearning.org. Lymed, Teaching with a Twist is a creation of Matt Whitstein, Associate Professor of Exercise Science at Elon University. Original music for the show was composed and recorded by Kai Mitchell, an Elon University alumnus. If you enjoy our podcast, please take a few moments to subscribe, rate, review, and share our show. We aim to bring insightful and relevant content to educators each month, and we would love to hear from you. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, do not hesitate to reach out. Our most updated information can be found on the Center for Engaged Learning website. Thanks for listening, and keep it zesty.